much, Clara, and oh, there's that ominous recording voice. And thank you everyone for joining this evening and for bearing with us with technical difficulties. If you could bear with me for 5 seconds further, I'm just going to get my screen shared, which hopefully you can all see now. I'm seeing nods, that's great. So as Clara said, I'm going to talk very, very briefly about the Defund Climate Chaos Coalition, which has kind of put together this briefing session and has been part of the movement for climate justice over the last few months. So I just wanted to give a kind of brief overview of what the coalition is, who's a part of it, and the kinds of actions that it's been taking as part of the climate movement, as an introduction to some of the more detailed things that Tony's going to be talking about. And then when we start to discuss things together about how trade unions can get involved and what you can do as a trade unionist, it will hopefully give you some steer as to the kinds of work the coalition is doing. So the Defund Climate Chaos Coalition, I haven't said that mouthful in quite a while now, is a coalition of groups which is fighting for climate justice. And it's specifically looking at organising for climate justice within the financial sector. So at the moment, UK banks, and we're thinking in the UK context at the moment, investors and insurers are fueling the climate crisis by pumping and funneling billions of pounds into polluting and destructive industries, most notably fossil fuels. And without the support of the finance sector, companies like Shell and BP and other fossil fuel companies wouldn't be able to operate. They wouldn't be able to continue to push an economic system, a energy system, which is driving the climate crisis. And so in light of that, the demands of the Defund Climate Chaos Coalition are very, very simple. We want to see the finance sector ending its financing of the fossil fuel industry. We want to see that sector funding and paying climate reparations and funding a global just transition. So those are the demands of the coalition, and it's a group of organisations, grassroots campaigners, and social movements that have come together under those aims and under those demands to take action in pursuit of them. So the coalition was formally launched last year and has been involved in some really, really high profile and significant mobilisations and actions since then. So on the eve of COP26, the talks in Glasgow last year, people across the globe as part of this coalition took action and took the fight to the doors of the major banks, the investors and the insurers that are driving the climate crisis. These actions put the financing of fossil fuels top of the agenda the day before those talks took place in Glasgow. So there's you can see on the screen right now, this is a action that took place on the 29th of October last year in the run up to COP in the US, targeting BlackRock, a major investment firm, as part of the coalition. We also had actions across the UK as part of that mobilisation. So here is an action that took place outside Standard Chartered, which again is another investment firm. And you can see there, maybe behind the mask, you can identify Greta Thunberg as one of the participants in that action that was led by the youth strikers from across the world. We also took action at the Bank of England and held a memorial for the people whose lives have already been lost as a result of the climate crisis. And took action outside Macquarie Capital, which is one of the biggest financiers of the Silvertown Tunnel project in London, which is a massive new road building project that will lead to increased pollution, will lead to increased emissions, and so on. Following that mobilisation at COP26, the coalition has come together again to organise a series of major actions targeting the AGMs of banks, of financiers, and of fossil fuel companies. And you can see here on the screen, this is a action that took place outside Lloyd's of London, which is one of the biggest insurers of fossil fuels in the world. It insures something around like 40% of the global energy market and has a reputation for insuring projects that no other insurers will touch. So campaigners, as part of the coalition, built a giant oil pipeline outside their headquarters and took action outside their AGM. Similarly, we had actions outside the AGMs of Barclays and Shell, and in fact the Shell AGM this year had to be postponed because of the disruption that took place. But in all those actions, because this is a decentralized network of groups and campaigners and organizations, we weren't just organizing at the AGMs or outside the headquarters, but having distributed decentralized actions across the country. So here are a handful of photos of some actions that took place to coincide with the major actions at the Barclays AGM, but at branch level as well. So building campaigns within local communities. So that hopefully has given you a kind of flavour of the kinds of work the coalition is doing, and that we're hoping to build more support and more power behind. And I'll leave it there for now because we're short on time. And I think I'm going to hand over now to Tony to talk a little bit more about why specifically we've been targeting the finance sector, and why finance campaigning is so important in the battle for climate justice.
Thank you, Chris. Firstly, I am not an expert. It's rather, just this whole concept of expert. I think we all would love to challenge that, and how that often makes, how in the structure and the system, how we create those kind of bottlenecks, and this is also one of the things that the finance industry uses as their defense, right? Like they act like a big black box, and they hide behind all of those complications and a lot of jargons and a lot of systems, structures. But at the core, we all really know what they're doing, and they try to hide a lot of their, the guilt and the destruction that they're responsible for. And that makes the task for us, of course, very difficult. But at the same time, this is also why, like, more and more, why we try to open that up and try to show how it's connected, and why following the money can be like one of the biggest solution, or at this moment, to move this lever that's kind of keeping stuck our system, the structures, to move away from fossil fuels. I will quickly share my screens. It's really probably a lot of you know way more than me. I already have some people in the audience, specifically Rumana Appa, who have worked in the past before. So there's many of you probably who would be able to share so much more around a lot of the topics that I'm going to share. But it's basically going to be a very basic initial conversation about why finance, like exactly what Chris said, like why targeting finance is important. At the same time, once we talk about it, we would also see that it's very intuitive, it's very basic, and it's in front of our eyes. But at the same time, what am I doing? At the same time, this is also one of those simple things that's not also so simple. So we would just run through some of the basic, like, so that's why I name it, I don't know, in the universities, whenever we took a course, it would be like economics 101 or like biology 101. It basically means like it's one of the very basic, like the starting building blocks of any of the things that we're trying to do. And here, and what we would try to do, we would go through this very basic 101, and we would try to then open up the discussion, maybe which afterwards also Chris would say. So it's just kind of starting thinking point from different work for each of the work that we are both doing. Like in this case, maybe the trade union work that you're all involved in, there is probably overlapping, there is entry point from your work to the finance campaigning, and why it even makes sense from trade union side as well to target finance, or kind of find bridges that could build alliances and enforce for the bigger change that we need in the coming days. So what do we basically mean? So what we would talk about in the next 8 to 9 minutes is just basically the fossil fuel industry. What is it? Like, I think it's always great to start from the very basics. So we would just go through what's fossil fuel industry, what do we mean about it, and then how do we tackle it? Like, how do we dismantle it when we think about first, if we need to dismantle it, then how we can do it. So to understand that, we need to know what keeps it going in the first place. And then we talk about the finance bit, of course. Then what are the different institutions? How are they connected? Like, so the black blocks, we try and see if it can be made simpler. And then we would just go through some very basic tips. What can be the key takeaways, and what can maybe specifically you do from your side? And within this structure, we would also quickly talk how, as Chris was showing a lot of these pictures from the Defund Climate Chaos last year, but also the stories of this Trans Mountain Pipeline movement, then the Stop ECOP campaign, how a lot of these frontline communities came together and built like a global coalition and network, and by following the money, they are winning campaigns. So we would also try to learn something, talk quickly about and what we can learn from those frontline struggles. So why do we talk about this whole climate or this whole big fossil fuels, right? Like, so if we go just the very basic, the reasons for climate change is the CO2 concentration in the air. And if you look at the main sources of CO2, one of the biggest chunk is around the fossil fuel combustion, the usage of fossil fuel, the extraction of it. There's also, for a certain part, is involved with the agriculture and the way we produce energy. But the biggest chunk would go the different ways, the way we are using energy, and the energy is coming from the fossil fuels. So what it means is that the fossil fuel industry alone is responsible for more than the 80% of global CO2 emission that's happening at the moment, right? So then if you want to solve, like, it is kind of at the heart if you try to solve the climate crisis. And at the same time, when we think about that, okay, fossil fuels, like there's this tar sand, this drilling in the Arctic, there's this, one of the bottom right pictures from the Germany's Rhineland region, where there's this huge, one of the largest coal mine in Europe, and this gas infrastructures. So that's what we think when we talk about fossil fuel, right? But we don't think about these shiny, wonderful buildings, but these are the buildings that are also connected with fossil fuels. So there's Deutsche Bank, HSBC, BP, of course, and RWD. So what it means that these are these structures, so it's not always directly seen. So there are all these nice shiny buildings in Frankfurt, in London, that are one of the main drivers. And when we think about, so then if we want to tackle them and if we want to move away from them, how do we break them down? And initially, traditionally, we believe that power is top down, like there is centralized power and it flows down. But actually, these structures, this fossil fuel, they are not so stable. They continuously need support, and they spend money, they use lots of lobbying power, they have lots of different pillars of support. So it's rather very fragile, because the whole people in this, they are against people, and we don't want them to be there. So they are supported by these different pillars of support. And if we can take away these pillars, we can topple them, right? So, and what are these pillars of support? Of course, then the finance, money, one of their biggest pillars of support. And if you want to break that, that would be the money. So to break them, to take away their money, to take away their power, one of the strongest way is to follow the money that's going to them. And that is why, like, that's where we come, that why targeting finance is one of the most important things. So what does it mean, following the money? So this is a example, just one case where it shows how Deutsche Bank, one bank, is responsible, how much money they are financing in a lot of the different fossil fuel projects. So there's RWE, that's inside Germany, right? But then this only shows the projects only in Europe. So it doesn't even include a lot of the other global ones. And there are projects even in Bangladesh, in India, that also has financing backing from Deutsche Bank. So this is just to show then how much power then this just one bank, and how they are financing and how much they're involved. So what does it mean then for the whole finance sector, right? So the financial institutions, now we try to, if we go a bit deeper into this black box, how are they connected? So there is this, each of these different institutions play different roles to support the fossil fuel businesses. So there are banks, as we were looking at Deutsche Bank. They traditionally give loans to different projects, to different fossil fuel companies. Then there are insurance companies who provides insurance and underwriting, like these are the two services that they give to the fossil fuel companies. And then there are investors who puts their money through buying bonds of the companies and buying shares. And then there are that Chris was mentioning, this BlackRock, this certain asset managers. There are one to two, like the whole wealth. This is also again this crazy fucked up situation, like where we live in capitalism, that in total 10% of total world's wealth is managed by just one company, and they are an asset manager. They're called BlackRock. So this what it necessarily means, that these asset managers have huge power, because a lot of this centralized, like they have control over a huge amount of world's total wealth. So in total, 3 companies apparently control more than 30% of total world's wealth. So two of the top ones are BlackRock and Vanguard. And what do? Is, so they decide to also invest on behalf of their customers. So asset manager means that if you have so much asset, you don't even have time to manage these. There would be people who you would pay money to manage your assets. So then these are the asset managers. So what they also do, so they decide on behalf of other people where to do. So they invest the money. They also have voting power, like this mustache guy below who are owner of different assets in different companies. So they also have some voting power to tell how the company should be operating or not. So asset managers also have lots of centralized voting power, because they themselves are also asset owners. And how each of them interact with each other is also very interesting. So the asset managers have access to banks, so they own shares and bonds of, also they have shares in banks. They are also managing, they themselves are big investors, and a lot of investors are customers of them. And they are also directly sometimes owning assets or owning shares of fossil fuel companies. What the banks do, the banks sometimes act as insurance. The banks themselves sometimes act as insurers. Banks sometimes provide themselves access insurance, and the insurance companies also act as asset owners. That means insurance companies also invest in fossil fuel companies. So all of them are connected in this complicated web that we see. But what's possible is that once we see it, then it's also possible, then we know how we can target each one of these different bits, and we can hold them accountable to whatever power they have, and also can push them to taking ownership behind this destruction that is happening through this fossil fuel projects in different communities. And at the moment, the whole climate crisis that we're facing, right? So what it means that then if we follow them, and if we try to hold them accountable, so we can help and stop and delay new projects. That's one bit, right? We can try to go project by project. We can we know stories like, as I was saying, like with the Stop ECOP, we can talk about it quickly a little bit better. How long do I have?
You are fine. It's very interesting. So you can go for another 5 minutes.
Okay.
If you wish.
Yeah, I would have to close in 5 minutes. So without the support of banks, investors, insurers, so all of these different institutions, right? The fossil fuel projects cannot go ahead. So if we can force them to withdraw support, then it's better. But at the same time, like this is the moment so where we can also expose, because they also now the more pressure is there, what they also, because they're of course very smart, right? Now they come up with new ideas of to be green, to be sustainable. So then there's this another added layer to also expose that whenever they're doing so, this is also kind of calling out on their bullshit is also another added word, right? But then that also means that we also need to go stronger in targeting them. So it's kind of, this is one way we can go project by project. It's of course, it's the duty and it's necessary for the activists in the global north, because this is also something we can do with the power and the relative safety that we have in the countries in global north to stand in solidarity with the projects and the people in global south. But at the same time, we also cannot be everywhere. We cannot stop project by project, right? Because there are so many projects, and this shouldn't be how it is, that we keep going project by project. That also means we have to target systematically. Then we also need to go in a broader, like the demands need to go towards more policy changes. And this is what means, like what can we demand? We can say, don't fund this coal mine, don't fund this specific project. Then we can demand, don't fund any coal, don't fund any oil. And then the broader ones, like don't fund any fossil fuels, right? And this is where we need to be, because this is where we are because of the existing reality. So that this is just to show then in our demands, these are useful. So this is kind of two parts of the bigger struggle. So we need to resist specific projects, but at the same time, we also need to keep demanding for broader policy change. The specific projects are one way, like kind of embodiment of this bigger fight, but just by, we don't also have enough time that we can win by stopping one project to one project. So that means then we have to kind of have this bigger systemic view, and then kind of try and find what are the systemic power we have, where can we put control, where are the moments to demand for policy changes, and what kind of, so from where we are, what are the moments where we can find maybe potential connection, maybe connected solidarity moments, or using our whatever access to different institutions we have, we can use those as levers and keep demanding for systemic change. So this is just to say that in our vision, we need to have this need for demand for systemic change, and at the same time, as solid as we can be to the immediate problems we have, this can be a powerful joining, like a way of demands that we can keep pushing for and keep making demands for broader change. So this just to say then, what then in terms of tips, what does it mean? So if you want to get active around finance, what does it mean? So the first thing is really, no one needs to know everything about finance to campaign on finance. Basically, like the finance, they study, they have all of their money, they have, this is their earning, like the whole financial sector, that's what they do, and they try to, of course, intentionally make it complicated, right? That's their job. We don't need to all of this. So we don't need to know how are the intricacies of policy to call them out when they're not right. And that's the front, one of the first thing, that we have the moral strength, we have the moral power. We just need some basic understanding, and there's always resources, maybe people we could ask for specific policy suggestions. There are different policy nerds where we could go and ask for, but for a movement, for a public campaigning, it's more important that we know we have the moral right, and this is time that they need to change. That's it. And then this is like, yeah, the money is something people, we understand to some basic extent, but not to in a complicated way. But then we, at the same time, we also know how much power money has, and that also means that this can be one of the tools of forcing change at the moment. People care about people, so that means for our movement stories, and at the core also, this is what now we are also trying to make for the financial institutions. All of this decision making, they hide behind this cold armor of numbers and not feeling attached. They don't feel connected to the impact they have in people, real people's lives. But this whole thing, this whole fight, it is about real people. This is our starting point, and I think that's kind of one of the core for any kind of campaigning, any movement that we want to build. And then in terms of the and that also means, of course, in their way, they also want to be away from this real world, but at the same time, that means it's our work. We can try to bring the real world to them in terms of what's happening outside. We can build real power through solidarity when we are connected, when we find vision, how each of our fights are connected. We build power, we build, like, so through solidarity we can build strength. And then the last bit is that we can be creative. This is one of our biggest strength and tool. And maybe, so from some of the pictures, I want to show some of the pictures, but there's some of the pictures that Chris was showing. So this beautiful, like the street mural that we saw from the Defund Climate Chaos TU action, that itself is very powerful. There are some examples in Germany. There is this Koala Collective. They are a small group of people, but they were able to impact quite a lot, have a lot of impact on European central banks' policies, just the kind of creative action they were doing. So there are these tools that we can try and have access to make our demonstration, our campaigns powerful. And these are the strengths that we have. So yeah, that's something like, there's like, we have all the freedom to be creative. And that's it basically. And then this would be, then I would close with this question. So what does it then mean then from this understanding to just food for thought? What can trade unions do, or what can be an entry point? What could it mean to have like a finance campaign entry for trade unions? With this, I stop. Thank you everyone for listening to me.
Thank you, Tony.
Welcome.
I think it's been really enlightening, actually, and you've got this power to share very complex things in a very simple way. And it showed this system is really, we don't know where the power lies, and it's really useful to change our visions there. I was wondering if people had questions, they wanted clarification, or thoughts they wanted to share with the group following Tony's presentation. So we'll give a couple of moments to see if some people want to come in. And I already see Angela. Would you like to ask a question or comment on something? And maybe introduce yourself, because I don't think you were here in the introduction.
Hi, I'm Angela Payton. I live in Kilmarnock near Glasgow, and I'm in Unite Community, West of Scotland branch. I was just to say, if you could say a bit more about, it just came to my attention about the sort of thing, the finance industry, the asset managers, the products that they're trying to push on investors, and essentially greenwashing. But there doesn't seem to be any regulation of the industry, that they seem to be able to get away with saying a product is green, that they're investing in something sustainable, but in actual fact they're not. They've got get out clauses sort of everywhere you look, so they can say, oh, it's only such, there's you can cut. They'll still invest in existing coal power plants, power stations, for example. It's just they won't invest in any new ones, and it's just wondering, how do we get round that? Or could you say something a bit more about that, please?
So, thanks, Angela. I'm just checking if there is any other immediate reactions or questions, and I can't see anybody else for now. I think we are all digesting the information, but maybe Tony, would you like to come back on this very important question?
Yeah, thank you, Angela. That's a very important question. Yes, and this is so with the asset managers, the problem is like they're called, like there's this term called like universal owner, that basically means like if it's one of those big asset managers like Vanguard or BlackRock, so they own asset across all the companies. So that means that they have huge power, but on the other side, literally there a study that shows that Vanguard has money at the moment, like more than 21 million, I think, or billion. I even have to check, like sometimes these numbers are so huge. I think it's billion in more than 12 projects that are considered carbon bombs. Like if any of those projects go ahead, we are going to get over 1.5 degrees of the threshold that we have. And in this time, so one of the simplest way to look at it is that we need commitment from, so whenever they say greenwashing, like whenever it's, oh, we are green, we are sustainable, oh, give your money with us, we will ensure your future. Unless they clearly say that our money does not go into any fossil fuel projects, any fossil fuel companies, and any kind of expansion. So because it's very clear, last year there was this one report from this International Energy Institution, they said that IEA, they said to be Paris aligned, we cannot afford to have any kind of fossil fuel expansion. So that really means that all of these companies, it should be fine. When they say, oh, we are aligned, that really means they need to come out clean saying, yeah, we are not putting any money into any, there cannot be, so that means they cannot be putting money in BP Shell anymore at all, because they're still doing Jackdaw, they're still exploring Arctic gas. So this really means, but then they wouldn't say that if they're as their customers, if you write to them and ask, I want to make sure my money is not going to distract the climate, can you ensure me that? They will probably come at you, yeah, we give money to there, we plant some trees here, but they will never promise you that their money is not going to any fossil fuel projects. And I think as a customer, this is also something we can hold very clearly, like I really need to hear from you very simply, can you promise me that you have a policy where you're making sure your money is not going into any fossil fuel expansion? They are not still doing that, but this itself can be like a, and that says, it's like a very simple line, one line, no fossil fuel expansion. Can you promise me that? So these are kind of some of the ways to really cut through their bullshit and be saying, hey, this is what I need to hear from you. Can you tell? And they would probably know they cannot say that, they would try to. So this is like how, yeah. And there's also another bit, just quickly, there's so many different now. The UN started it, this net zero alliances. So there's coming up a lot of these alliances, but eventually one of my colleagues, so this I don't know much at all about this. One of my colleagues, he knows a lot about this, all this net zero alliances and all of these big alliances that are coming up. And he is also very frustrated because he says, basically, these alliances were supposed to make sure that these insurers, asset managers, they are being aligned, but itself, these alliances are ending up being another greenwash show. And we don't need that. And this is, again, so that also means that we have to keep saying, like, I don't want to know if you're part of these alliances. Tell me what your policies are, so I'm not impressed. So I think this is where we have to go somehow, like, to keep cutting through their, so they have just gotten so used to just saying bullshit and getting away with it. That's also the problem. But I guess, then we have to keep coming back. Sorry, it was a bit long, but yeah.
No, thanks for that. Anybody else got a question for Tony before we start reflecting about what we can do as trade unionists? I have got a question if nobody else has, and if I may, but I can't see any other hands. Okay, so we've looked at those, private companies being funded by private banks, private insurances with like private shareholders. But we also often talk about the role of governments, and that can be like in lots of different ways. It can be like direct subsidies, but also laws that may pass to allow certain practices and tax evasions, etc. So I was wondering, in terms of, do you know, in terms of quantity of money, is those government sort of discounts or subsidies are like really small compared of the private investment? And what is the balance between targeting government and targeting those companies directly? That'll be my question. And maybe if you don't mind, we take Suzanne as well, if you can like all that that sort of thoughts, and we bring Suzanne as well. Thank you. Suzanne.
How easy is it to get hold of the information about where your union pension funds are invested, given that you've got these sort of huge asset management? Because obviously, although a union's funds are, one pot, in actual fact, they're often a split between different asset managers, and then those asset managers actually funnel into other people. So is it that easy to follow the money? And two, if you work for a council, your council will also have their asset managers and pension funds. And I mean, I worked with COP26 for Exeter, and one of the things that they have been trying to do for the last 3 years is trying to get Exeter City Council to stop investing in fossil fuels. When they find, first they said, oh yes, they weren't investing. Then they admitted, yes, they were. Then they said that, oh, well, they couldn't do anything about it because they owed it to the people whose pensions they were that they would have the best return. And then it was pointed out that actually it wasn't the best return. It's actually quite dangerous because it's very short term. And then they backed off and said, oh, well, it's committed and we can't do anything about it. So is there some sort of central information center where we can get this information and get it out to people so that when they are campaigning, they can, tunnel in on, focus on a specific thing and come back with the information so that we're not perpetually, being run round in circles while the people who've got the information are actually, moving from one lie to another. I'm sorry, that's a bit complicated, but I'm sure you've come across that situation a lot. So where do I go to find that information or to help people find it?
Thank you, Susan. That's a very good question. So it's actually a very, very good starting point in terms of going with the pension funds of the trade unions. And so I think, firstly, it has to be, so that's the thing they said that, oh, we are committed, we cannot move. It cannot be the case. Like, of course, as clients, they must have the even freedom to be able to move their funds, or it might be not so easy, it might be complicated a bit, it might involve some fees, so that means losing some money, but it has to be possible. In terms of information, so yes, it should be possible to track it down. So that would mean then we have some partners, some partner NGOs who are very like expert at digging down numbers and going into this technical information. And I think if there is interest, it should be possible that we can try and connect you and to find a way to get those numbers. Like so, because I'm based in Germany, a lot of my climate movement experience is based in here, and from the little bit that I know from the divestment campaign that happened in Germany, it was possible. Like a city of Munich, in more than 20 cities, the local divestment campaign was able to push their city council to move their fund out of fossil fuels. And it was also same for a lot of these universities in the US. So I believe there has to be a way that it's possible to find, and I'm very happy to stay in touch through directly or through Chris or Clara to be able to then, because when I hear you, I hear that you're sincerely looking for this information, and I think we can definitely find a way to get you. And when if it's specifically about the Exeter City Council, so probably there would be specific experts who would know where to look for those numbers. So yeah, so that's one bit that I can say. So I don't know exactly, but I know the people who could help us find those numbers, and I would be very, very happy and keen to make sure that you can have access to those numbers. And it's true for any of the campaignings any of the local campaigns that you want to start. We would love to make ways to find those numbers and data to have accessible. And the other question that, yeah, did I cover all your questions, Susan?
I said about the trade unions. Yes, that we also, I mean, I'm in NASUWT trade union, obviously NEU is even bigger, but each trade union has pension funds, employees, it has members in cities across the country, but it also has employees of its own and pension funds. Yeah, it has properties and investments, and it's about putting pressure on the trade unions to say what is happening in your local area. Yeah, so that it becomes a much more nationwide campaign rather than simply, one or two cities. Okay. Thank you.
That's a very good, yeah. So I guess this can be something to also then talk about if it's as in terms of a trade union campaign, this can be more elaborated and really planning. That would be great. And then quickly going back to the question that Clara was asking that, remind me?
Yeah, it was about the role of government and public money
Yes.
in subsidizing compared to the sort of private investments, and the balance into who do we concentrate our forces on?
Yeah, I think it would be then also to see who you might have the biggest lever, because at the same time, as I was trying to show also through the third, like one of the last slides, that for a lot of the systemic power lies on the governments, but it also depends. So with the European Central Bank recently, like there was a lot in terms of a lot of the things that the bank started doing was not thought that it's possible in the past. Like now the bank is really taking climate into their, like it's unprecedented that a central bank said they're going to start including climate into their risk analysis. So that has a huge potential in terms of shifting the landscape. But at the same time, as I was trying to show, that all of them are complicatedly connected. So I think in terms of thinking, it could be the first point could be where you, like from the trade union perspective, where is the biggest lever that the trade unions have? Then if it's through the pension fund money that they have and this asset manager connection they being a client, they could have a huge, because the asset managers themselves also have so much power that there's also this internal backdoor lobbying, right? Like they also have even sometimes power over central banks because they have certain lobbying. So it's possible. So depending on where would be the strongest lever for you, I would say probably that would be the smartest strategy then to then go after that and do the analysis and find allies. And yeah, because we would need to target all of them. And of course the government, so the governments, the asset managers, so these are the biggest ones where there's lots of like system change power is there, but at the same time, where do you have the strongest strength then to go after?
Thank you very much. Now, thank you. It's been so useful, and I think this is only the start of our conversation in trade union movements. So yeah, I'm very pleased we're starting tonight. And so next we're going to be using the rest of the time to discuss about, what next steps we can take. And obviously it's only a small group of us tonight, but we can start coming up with some ideas. We're going to run some more of those briefings in the future. Hopefully we can reach out to more people. So what I propose in the moment is that maybe we can go around the room. Hopefully people will want to contribute with any ideas or suggestions that you've got as a next step that we could consider to tackle those issues of fossil finance and get more trade unionists involved. And one quite straightforward, but maybe a little bit boring idea that we've started with is to actually have a model motion, because trade unions, we love motions. They allow us to engage in conversation in our branches, in our networks, in our regions, but also it can allow us to change trade union policies. Because if we haven't got the correct policies at national levels, the resources of the union often cannot be directed to those campaigns. So I'm going to ask Chris to take a few minutes just to present to us this model trade union motion that you all should have received, and you will receive a copy of it as well. So we'd like you to progress it in your branches in your union. Chris?
Yeah, thank you so much, Clara. And I'll try and be as brief as possible because I can see some people having to drop off, and we also want to have quite a bit of time for discussion. But as Clara said, Tipping Point has put together a kind of model motion that tries to bring together all these things that we've talked about so far on this call. So bringing together the reasoning behind why targeting the finance sector is so important in the struggle for climate justice, but also bringing together the coalition of people that are behind those actions and the movement that we talked about at the beginning of the call. So I'll just talk very briefly about the motion and what's contained within it, so that you've got a sense of the motion that we've put together. So firstly, the motion highlights the major issues that we're facing at the moment as in the kind of global climate movement following COP26 and the shortcomings and failures of COP26 and its outcomes. So it highlights the ways in which the talks failed, both in terms of failing to put an end to fossil fuel expansion, but also in failing to take any immediate action and in any kind of tangible way to tackle the finance sector's funding and insurance of the fossil fuel industry. From there, what the motion does is it sets out the central kind of beliefs and values of the Defund Climate Chaos Coalition that we talked about earlier. So setting out that climate justice requires keeping fossil fuels in the ground, that banks, insurers and financial institutions have to stop supporting fossil fuel extraction, that crucially public money must stop be given in subsidies or in direct handouts to polluting industries, that polluters and finance executives that are profiting from climate chaos must pay climate reparations, that we tax financial institutions to support investment in green jobs and to finance a just transition. And finally, that the financial industry itself must be democratized to force that just transition and energy access for all. So the picture that Tony gave us of what the financial industry looks like, that needs to be uprooted from the ground up to get a financial system that can meaningfully create the just transition that we need. So that's the kind of background behind the motion, and then the motion itself goes on to specifically to mandate trade union branches or your local trades council, or indeed a national trade union conference, to take a series of specific steps. So firstly, to support campaigns to end fossil fuel projects such as the Stop Cambo campaign and others, to communicate the issues surrounding the financing of fossil fuels to members and affiliates of the trade union, and to sign up to the Defund Climate Chaos Coalition and to support mobilizations that target the financing of fossil fuels. So that's a kind of whistle-stop tour overview of the motion, which is designed to bring more and more trade unions into the climate justice movement. The motion is specifically designed to be a kind of template that you can pick up and submit directly to your union branch now straight away off the back of this meeting, but also so that it can be amended and tweaked and changed as needed for your union, your branch, your local context, and so on. And there'll be some people on this call who are seasoned AGM goers who have submitted more motions than they've had hot dinners, and so don't need any kind of background or information on how to get a motion passed through your trade union branch. But there will be some of you who may well be brand new to submitting motions, and so Clara has just popped in the chat a link to a guide that we've put together, which sets out all the different steps you need to take to get a motion passed through your trade union. And it kind of will guide you through that process, which can, as many of you will know, be slightly bureaucratic and feel not like the most intuitive process in the world. So as Clara said, that's just one idea that we've got of how you can engage your trade union at a branch level, at a regional level, at whatever level in the fight for climate justice, specifically around targeting fossil fuels. Now, before we kind of jump into discussion and bring you into it, I just wanted to say briefly why, from my perspective, this is so important that trade unions do get involved in this work. And I think for me, there's two reasons. The first is that we're up against this kind of Goliath of an enemy here in the global financial system, which is not an easy battle to win against. But what they have in wealth, what they have in power, what they have in influence, we have in organizing, in solidarity, and in collective power. And the collective power of the labour movement has consistently shown that it is the one of the biggest and most important drivers of social change and of progress. So getting the trade union movement involved is so important for the success as a whole, but also because in the climate movement, we're talking about delivering a just transition, which gives people a livelihood based on a good green job. And the people who need to be as part of that conversation, as part of that movement, are the organizations that represent workers, and making sure that any transition we do have away from the fossil fuel kind of based economy is one that is just, that does protect workers, that does protect jobs, and that puts those at the heart of it. So that's why, to me, it's so important. And we now want to have a conversation about what you can do, what you want to do to support the movement for climate justice, the movement to combat fossil finance in your trade union. We initially were going to do this in breakout groups, but because there's a smaller group, as Clara said, we'll kind of go around and talk about it as one big group. And I think, Clara, you had in mind a method of doing that, so I'll hand back to you to kind of facilitate, but I'll be taking notes throughout so that we capture everyone's thoughts as well, but we won't be recording your contributions, I think. So Clara's going to stop the recording and then facilitate the conversation from there.